obviously the breaking news coming out of New York is that President Trump has filed an emergency petition to the Supreme Court to prevent the sentencing that was supposed to happen this Friday.
That's right. And so this has been docketed by the Supreme Court. I'm looking at the docket page right now.
Supreme Court of the United States.
24A 666. Unfortunate number there.
Yeah.
But what we've got is an application for stay submitted to Justice Sotomayor. And then they have said a response to this application requested by Justice Sotomayor by 10 a.m. Eastern tomorrow on January 9th. So they have received this, docketed it, and are asking Alvin Bragg's team for a response to this motion by 10 a.m. tomorrow. What the president is asking the Supreme Court to do is issue a stay on the New York Supreme Court, which is their lowest level, which is kind of like the U.S. District Court level. Those proceedings, this is on the campaign finance violation, the 34 felonies that President Trump is supposed to be sentenced to on Friday of this week. So they are asking for this response by tomorrow. President Trump is asking the Supreme Court to say, halt those proceedings while my interlocutory appeal, my appeal on the ruling of immunity, goes forward at the state level. Now, this is, once again, Supreme Court getting involved with state issues. President Hutchison, Professor Hutchison.
I like that.
There's a lot of words going on today. So, Professor Hutchison.
That was very Trump. A lot of words.
You look at this, and one, it is the Supreme Court typically likes to stay out of state issues unless absolutely necessary. However, the flip side of that is this is the first time that their ruling back earlier this year on presidential immunity is being tested. He's asking, based off your ruling, that's what I'm appealing in the state court system. Should the state court pause the proceedings until that appeal is exhausted? Almost putting a little bit of pressure on the Supreme Court to look at this because to some degree, it's of their doing by creating this ruling earlier in the year. What are your thoughts on the overall picture, what he's asking, and where we could go from here?
Well, ultimately, my view is that this particular appeal is basically down to a flip of a coin. Typically, the Supreme Court is unlikely to take an appeal in a low-ranking felony matter where there is no sentencing, or at least custodial sentencing, contemplated by the judge. However, the big issue for the Supreme Court in terms of its own legacy is whether or not it will uphold its earlier decision granting presidents immunity for official acts. There's extensive evidence in the record showing that Judge Merchan allowed into evidence contested information which dealt with President Trump's official acts while in office. So I think that was a mistake by the trial court. That's number one. Number two, it's important to keep in mind that this is an interlocutory appeal. In other words, the state courts haven't finished their decision-making, and they're unlikely to finish their decision-making in this particular case, in my judgment, for months. And so the Supreme Court will indeed have an incentive to stay out. Lastly, let me make this particular point. Alan Dershowitz argues, however, that many of the liberal members of the Supreme Court may wish to step in and in this lawfare once and for all, so Americans can proceed with their business, which is basically the inauguration of Donald Trump on January the 20th, and he can move forward with a clean slate.
Harry, can you lead us through a little bit, people who are commenting, I'm seeing it come through right now, of what the process even is when you're trying to get something like this stayed, when you're trying to get a decision pushed back? They filed to the Supreme Court, and is it the justices making this decision? Are they coming together like they would for a regular case and having a discussion? Is this assigned to somebody? How does that work in terms of who's making the final decision? Because obviously, even in our comments, I'm seeing people go, well, this justice clearly is not going to vote that way, but hey, this one could. So how does that all come together?
Very good question. So in this particular case, Judge Sotomayor, one of the liberal justices, has been assigned to this particular case. And so some of our listeners have noted that she is unlikely to vote in favor of Donald Trump. However, since this is a fairly momentous decision and it will have presidential value going forward, she may wish to invite, if you will, all of the members of the Supreme Court into this particular decision so they can take collective blame or praise.
Yeah, I get that. That's good leadership.
And so I think she will probably defer to the entire court before rendering a final judgment. That's just a guess.
Yes.
Please do not bet thousands of dollars on that guess.
And to that point as well, Professor Hutchison, there's really three things that we could see come out of this. One, Justice Sotomayor could rule on a stay by herself. And so therefore, because of the way each justice is assigned one of the appellate jurisdictions, and so this is where Justice Sotomayor receives these appeals, these asks for stay and things of that nature. So that's just by the nature of where the court case was. It wasn't luck of the draw. Right. It's just the normal path through the appellate process. Right. She could decide to issue a stay on her own. She can refer, as you mentioned, to the entire Supreme Court to see if they can shoulder some of the blame or praise, as you mentioned there. Or also, they're not required to do anything as well. Right. They could, especially with a Friday deadline, she can get the reply tomorrow and still not do anything. And Absolutely. Then the time period dissolves on its own, and the Supreme Court just sat on their hands, which in many cases, when you ask for a stay of this nature, they don't respond, especially when it is, as you referred to, normally in the normal course of jurisprudence, a relatively minor issue for the Supreme Court, something wouldn't typically even make it that far up. But because of all the context, it being a president-elect, a former president, all of those issues, a presidential immunity ruling, that I feel like there's at least a little bit more likelihood of some sort of response. But that also, that interlocutory appeal issue, Supreme Court tends to not get involved until final judgment, final appeals judgment has gone through. That you even remember the 14th Amendment case. They didn't step in until the Colorado Supreme Court. It had gone through the lower level, the appellate level, and then the Supreme Court of Colorado had to weigh in before they even jumped in. So as we said, we don't have a lot of answers, but it does feel like there are a lot of options for the Supreme Court to take here.
I think there are tons of options, and certainly the coward's way out, you might say, is for the Supreme Court to do nothing. Just sit on their hands and allow the sentencing to move forward. They may, however, wish to intervene. Why? Because it involves the President of the United States, number one, and then number two, it involves their own decision-making. I think it is crystal clear as well that President Trump can adduce evidence showing that Judge Merchan allowed official acts to be brought before the jurors in this particular case. That then taints his sentencing decision, even if it's a non-custodial decision. So there's an argument to be made in favor of the Supreme Court intervening, but I would not bet my last dollar on it.